Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Today I've got a really interesting guest on, somebody that's actually looking at her profile, seeing very similar background to myself, and how she started her own business, super interesting. But let me do a bit of an intro after doing a bit of a stalk on your LinkedIn profile. See, if I if I look at the amount of companies that you have been working with or working for, the total list right now is at 22. If I counted everything correctly there on your LinkedIn profile. So
no, that's a
so,
fraction of the companies I've worked with.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, only a fraction, Okay,
Oh yeah.
there you go. Okay, well, there we go. So, marketing and growth advisor across a number of different brands. Was VP of marketing at a company called Unbounce. Very, very familiar with Unbounce myself, having used it in a couple of past lives as well.
Awesome.
So really cool there. Grew that company from 1 to 15 million very quickly as well, from what I've seen on your profile, without much funding as well, which is very commendable, very, very commendable.
Mm-hmm.
And also now CEO and co-founder of a company called Forget the Funnel. And you've also got a book coming out in a week from now called Forget the Funnel as well. So really happy to have you on today, Georgiana.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Sure, no worries. Tell us a little bit about the book, by the way. So what's going to
Oh, the
come?
book. Yeah, by the way, the fact that it is has the same name as our company was never our intention at all.
Sure.
That was we were voted off the island the name that we wanted for the book. We did put it to a bit of a vote to our wider community, and they all said, no, it's got to be Forget the Funnel. People understand what that means, and it begs the question, if not the funnel, then what? So we went for it. But the genesis of the book is sort of the genesis for the business, truthfully. This idea that, especially for recurring revenue businesses, acquisition focused marketing and even awareness focused marketing is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the opportunity for marketing inside of companies. And so the book itself is about a process that my business partner and I, Claire Selentrop, use with companies that we work with, that's basically rooted in customer research, that's operationalized so that teams can action those insights and really figure out how to grow their companies from a marketing perspective, but also from a sort of growth perspective or product strategy perspective, rooted in customer insight and in such a way that allows teams to really build solid strategies without guessing, without going outside to the experts to tell them what to do, or relying on what they did at the company that they were at before, or what they see everybody else doing, but really relying on their best customers to really tell them, what's going on in their world, how do they make purchase decisions, what do they get from their product in their own words, and sort of allows teams to operationalize that and just be a lot more strategic and stop guessing, because there's far, far too much guessing happening in marketing.
It's data-driven guessing, though. So, that's the...
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with data, because I find that it can sort of lead us astray sometimes, and we rely on averages, and we're asking the wrong questions, and we rely on our data to give us too much direction, and we sort of use it to a default. I prefer to say customer-led and data-informed as opposed to data-led, because I think the data is there to complement, not to necessarily be the driver.
I fully agree with that. And I also say quite often, like, as a marketing, if you have a small marketing team generally, I'd be interested to get your take on this. But if you have a small marketing team and you're trying to get initiatives off the ground, I mean, are the things you're doing making sense? Like, from a marketing perspective, like, marketing is not rocket science to come up with ideas, but it can be rocket science to execute, right? That's the thing. Like, everybody can come up with a smart idea, but actually executing it well is difficult. That's very, very difficult. So in my point of view, yes, there's this stuff that back it up, like what your customers are saying, as you said. Like, are the customers saying, like, this is what we want, or prospects are saying what this is what we want? And second of all, does it actually make sense? Like, use your common sense, right? Instead of being like, does the numbers back up the fact that we're like, I have people come to me, they get 1,000 people coming to their site a month, right? And they're like, let's A/B test all the copy on the homepage. I'm like, you could run that test for 25 years.
Yes.
And not see
that's right. Yeah.
Does it make sense? Or could you just put your website copy and say what you do in the hero? like in 5 words,
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most challenging things I think that most marketers are facing, to your point, is not a lack of ideas. There's so many ideas. It's actually prioritization generally that tends to be the hardest thing. And part of the reason I think that it is prioritization tends to be difficult, especially for smaller marketing teams or smaller marketing sort of orgs, is everybody is marketed to. So we all think we're marketing experts, right? Even the non-marketing teams. I mean, I know this happens inside of the companies that we've worked with. It's very, very typical that marketing is put off, for earlier, if I'm thinking about, earlier stage companies, marketing gets put off until it's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets laced in, right? It gets added on after the fact, like, well, shit, we need leads now. Oh, I'm sorry. I totally swear.
Oh my God.
Well, you said no swearing, and then I did.
That shit isn't a swear. That's fine.
Okay, so I agree. Okay, good. So yeah, marketing gets layered on in sort of an emergency situation where, oh, now we need leads. Like we've built this thing and now we need people coming through the front door. And so a lot of times what I've seen happen is, founders will get, will pull marketers in sort of, there's a couple of different ways, right? Either they'll pull in somebody who they can afford, that's sort of like maybe, mid-level or mid-career sort of marketer that maybe has adjacent experience, and then kind of tells them what to do, and doesn't really provide them with the sort of freedom to make strategic decisions, but rather sort of stays on and starts dictating, and then they it ends up turning into this sort of like order taker situation. And that can happen just as often with the CEO as it can with the COO or head of product, depending on the structure of your team, or sales. That happens a lot too. I'm sure you've witnessed that. So it can happen a lot where a head of marketing, if not sort of empowered and having a seat at the table, ends up sometimes falling prey to being an order taker to the other departments or the board. That happens too. And so they end up with this list of things that they have to try and have to test. And it's a long list of ideas that come from, inside the team, but also externally, what they've seen other experts do. And then they get just lost in the weeds of execution. And that's actually where Forget the Funnel was sort of born. When Claire and I first started chatting, it was in 2017. We'd both just left our in-house roles, and we were both being hit with a lot of founders coming to us in the B2B SaaS space, saying like, hey, you've done this before. We need somebody who knows what they're talking about. Our marketing team is good, but they don't have the experience. They haven't gone from, early stage to scale up, and you have that experience. So you should come in here and tell the marketing team what to do. It's just so common. And we recognize that there's a lot of folks in marketing, especially in tech, in that situation where they're just sort of inundated with ideas. They've got their own ideas, and they're kind of not empowered to make strategic decisions. And that's, we've launched Forget the Funnel as a workshop series for that audience, for those in-house marketers. That's where we sort of started. And actually, as the story goes, we were like, we don't know if we should do this. So maybe we should put it out into the world first and see if there's interest. And we were just telling this story recently, actually. We wrote a Medium article called like The Problem with SaaS Marketing. And at the end of the article, we were like, we're thinking about launching a workshop series for marketers in this situation. Like, if you're interested, sign up. And I think it was like within, I can't remember the number of hours, but I think it was in the first day we had 400 people sign up. And like, who were we? We were like, we were nobody, right? Like there was no reason, but clearly there was very much a need. And in our form where we asked, for an email address, we asked like, what led you to sign up? And the gut-wrenching responses we got to that form about what is going on inside these companies for these marketers was absolutely, like I said, gut-wrenching. The story that sticks out in my mind was like, I was going to quit on Friday, and now I'm going to hold on. I'm going to wait for this workshop series. Like, it's really bad. I'm crying in the bathroom on my lunch break. Like, bad situations of these marketers just being like, you need to be more strategic, and sort of being told what to do and having a hard time executing, prioritizing and executing, and really being seen as like strategic and having that seat at the table. So that is kind of where Forget the Funnel came from, truthfully.
It makes perfect sense as well. I think in that specific space of B2B SaaS, I think it's probably because it's relatively new in the grand scheme of things. You know, B2B SaaS, it's probably 15 years old, maybe,
Yeah,
since it really since it really exploded, if even, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Like
that's just,
truthfully
yeah,
exploded.
truthfully, yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
and I think there's just that lack of experience there from more senior leaders coming in and actually saying like, that again, going back to what makes sense, like, why no, let's not do that. And CEOs need that. But if you have somebody who's got that little seed of doubt, a little bit junior, doesn't have the experience, they don't
Right.
have the backbone because they don't have the experience. We have to put the foot down and say,
That's
no.
right. And they've got the imposter syndrome, like, well, how do I know better than them?
Yeah.
But a lot of these, again, especially, I know we're talking about tech and SaaS a lot, but is in that environment, I think part of the problem too is that a lot of these companies are started by very product focused folks. They think like product managers, they think like product owners and product designers, as they should, but they don't inherently understand marketing, and they tend to underestimate the need for marketing early enough. They overestimate what marketing is capable of doing in a short amount of time. And both of those things combined with this like mid-career or even junior marketer is just not a good, like, it's not a cohesive sort of environment. And so that's exactly, especially what was happening. I mean, back in 2017, it's still happening today. I feel like it's not quite as bad as it was, but a lot of folks were leaving. Like, I'm getting out of tech, basically, where a lot of these marketers were just like, I got to get out of tech because who am I? They're among the lowest paid folks on the team. Them marketers and customer success, lowest paid folks on the team, but with massive targets on their head. So it's a really, really stressful situation. And actually, just back to the sort of the genesis of Forget the Funnel and what we wrote the book about, the framework that we describe in the book is actually meant to empower not only marketers, but I guess, one of the primary use cases could be for marketers, is really like, stop guessing, stop relying on like the highest paid people in the room, basically, to tell you how to do marketing. And if you can go to your best customers and find out from your best customers what was going on in their world that led them to seek out a solution like yours. What was that pain, right? What solution are they firing in order to hire your solution? Who do they go to? Who do they talk to? What resources did they sort of leverage in order to discover you, right? Like, that's marketing awareness 101 right there. If you can find out that information from your best customers, you'll know exactly where to go and market to them. And further to that, like, how did they describe their problem? How did they describe your solution? So once they got to your website, what was it about your solution that convinced them to give it a try? Once they got into your product or started onboarding into your experience, what was it that convinced them to keep going? And then what are they able to do now that they weren't able to do before? All of those data points, right? And I'm air quoting here, can give you all the insight you could possibly need, not only to market them and find them and reach your target audience out in the world where they are, but also how to onboard them, how to engage them over time, how to, continue that relationship for the long term. And the idea there is that it's hard to argue with your customers, right? It's very hard to argue for a CEO, for a product manager or product owner, or, head of sales, if that person in a marketing role can say, you know what, I did some customer research and our best customers say X, Y, Z. Here's some quotes. Here are some faces and names of our amazing customers and what they say. It's hard to argue with that. It's very, very compelling to bring customer insights to a team. And so that's what the customer-led growth framework is meant to do, is empower those customer-facing teams to sort of operationalize those insights and build strategies around them.
Yeah, it's funny because you're not the first person that's been on this podcast to mention that. I think you're maybe the fifth that's talked about, just get closer to your customers, right? And of course, like with the website,
I mean, it sounds table stakes. It's hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, but Yeah.
Exactly. No, it is a hard thing to do. You know, we spoke about it. I was speaking with it with somebody else about 2 weeks ago. I'm just trying to think about who it was. It was actually on this podcast. I can't remember who it was though. But
Mm.
there are certain ways in which you can sort of simplify it for yourself, especially if you're doing things like events and stuff like that. So if you're in a position where you're able to get out on at the coalface somewhat, whether it be an event or
Mhm.
whatever, and look to get introductions that way, that's a very
Yeah.
helpful way of pushing forward with it, right? I've also been.
It's
Go ahead.
It's one, but I will push. I would say that one is harder, especially if you have other goals around your event. Like if you're sponsoring a conference, for example, and you've got other goals. I mean, I'm not saying customer conversations are ever a bad idea. They're always a great idea. But there are a couple of low lift ways to actually execute on this stuff, even with surveys or interviews over, Zoom, like we're doing right now. And there are very sort of structured and very specific questions that you can ask to pull out what I was describing before, and then operationalize it and identify like KPIs around them and things like that as well. So again, I don't think anybody would argue that customer research is valuable, because generally everybody agrees that customer research is valuable. But customer research is even a term that we tend to tread lightly around when we talk about it, because it sounds time consuming. It sounds super error prone, right? Like analysis paralysis is a very real thing. And so we try to make sure that any of the companies that we talk to a lot of founders, we make it very clear that the research methodology that we're talking about employing here is like laser focused. It's super structured. It's got a very specific outcome. This isn't the same thing as, product research. This isn't UX research. This isn't audience research. It's very specifically focused on your ideal customers and operationalizing what your best customers say. And we've got like survey templates and interview questions and scripts and stuff like that we give away for free as part of the book, even to help teams sort of operate to run these types of research projects, because we know a lot of people talk about customer research, but it's one thing to talk about it and say, yeah, we're customer led, and it's another to actually implement and execute, like you were saying before.
For sure. I think that's probably like the best piece of advice that I could probably get from you during this call is to have that customer led approach, right? So think about how you can get closer to the customer, but also have it structured. So I think one of the things that many marketers that I've spoken with, and I've also found it myself, is actually getting those introductions to try to get to a place where you're actually able to reach out to the customer and ask them those questions, right?
Yep.
That's what I meant about being on events. If you're able to be there, you get the introduction, just a handshake at least, to get the conversation started. Like, hi, I'm Andy. I'm from marketing. I'd love to pick your brain sometime. To start that, I think that part is the piece that most marketers struggle with, that initial sort of, where do I
start?
approach it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I have thoughts on that. Obviously, the answer to that, like, how do I start question, depends on the type of company, right? If we're talking about a piece of software that's got hundreds of thousands of customers, obviously the methods you'd use is different than if you're in an enterprise scenario. But if you are in an enterprise scenario or have, fewer than like 500 customers, you can look at that customer base and identify you probably want to identify about 25 or so of your ideal customers. And what I mean by that, there's a couple of sort of criteria. Ideal meaning they're happily paying. They would never let this thing go. They're happily paying customers. That's sort of like they're happy and they're paying. Those are the first two criteria. And then the other criteria that I would say is a good place to start is they're recent. So they've been around, they made a purchase decision about your product in about the last 6 to 9 months. Now, depending on how long your sales cycle is, obviously play with that number, but they've got to be around, or they have to have made a decision recently enough that they remember what life was like before. Because if they've been your customer for 2 or 3 years, they made a purchase decision about your product in a different world. Completely different world, right? Not only pre-pandemic, but pre-recession. And so it is important to talk to customers that are a little bit more recent. So again, if you just identify this sweet spot of 25 customers, 25 folks, and reach out to them and say, look, we're just trying to learn. We want to learn from you. We're trying to make our product better for you. And you sort of position it more as like more product research than market research, right? Sometimes it's advantageous to have somebody on the product team actually be the person who reaches out, or the CEO or the founder actually does that email outreach. But we find that, your customers are invested in your success, and generally the response rate is decent. We don't go to incentives unless we absolutely have to. And in an enterprise scenario, we've never needed to go to incentives.
That makes perfect sense.
So getting those folks on a call is, like you said, having those conversations is really wildly valuable. And then there's certain questions that you can ask. Again, we've got these sort of interview scripts. Claire is the customer research sort of expert between the two of us, and she ran a workshop a couple of years ago on like how to run those interviews and how not to mess them up. Sometimes it's advantageous to outsource them, because it can be difficult for your customers to provide feedback to somebody at the company. They may be a little bit reluctant to give you like genuine, like sort of candid feedback. So it can help to outsource interviews for that reason. Also, it is hard to read the label from inside the jar. So we tend to go into calls with some bias if it's internally. So sometimes, again, hiring somebody external to run those interviews can be really, really advantageous, because there's no bias there. Your customers are not worried about offending you or hurting your feelings or telling you your baby is ugly, right? They can sort of be a little off the cuff, a little bit more off the cuff, and also, skilled interviewers are less likely to mess up the interviews, and you only get one shot at the interview. So that's another reason to maybe consider outsourcing.
Exactly. You maybe don't want to muddy up any of those customer relationships either. Probably not.
Yeah. Let the pros do it. That said, there might be internal. We have found that folks in customer success and customer support or in product roles tend to be, anybody with a journalism background tends to be really good at interviewing. So there's definitely a high possibility that you've got somebody internally to run them, but if not, outsourcing is definitely a good idea.
That's excellent advice. I'm just wary of time here. And I think, like, again, I just mentioned that this customer-led approach is something that every marketer can take away, especially just to summarize, to say, if you're looking for some very good like proof on whether or not something is a good idea, speak to your customers. See what they think about things. Maybe don't run to them with every marketing idea you have, clearly, but we were thinking of doing an email nurture stream. What do you think? So no, but I think by hearing it from the horse's mouth somewhat, in terms of why, as you said, why they chose you in the first place, why they work with you, why they continue to work with you, and then based off that, build your messaging, build your positioning, build your execution strategy, right?
That's exactly right.
That's excellent advice. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hey, where can people find you? And well, first of all, where's the best place to find you? Where's the best place to get in touch? Is it via your LinkedIn, or is how do people find Forget the Funnel?
Oh, definitely our website. I would say we're very inconsistent with our social media these days. But forgetthefunnel.com is definitely the best place to check out how we work with companies and some of our resources. We've got a big resource library of workshops available there. The book itself will be available on Amazon next week, but in the interim, we do have a pre-launch page up on our website. So there's a book page on our website to check out. And anybody who buys the book, there's also a workbook that goes along with it that's almost as long as the book itself. And I do want to also say it's not a theoretical book. It's a very practical sort of step-by-step process book. So we do recommend that, like, if you're a CEO or a founder and you're the first reader on this book, pass it on to your team, because the theory is laced throughout the book on why it works. And there's a lot of examples on success stories of using customer-led growth. But if you want to actually execute it internally for your team, I would definitely recommend passing the book on, to, a head of marketing or a head of product. Those folks are really well positioned to run with a project like that that's cross-functional.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We're going to put all of the links into the bio as well. So just to
Okay,
make people a description so
great.
that people can find their way there. But hey, Georgiana, thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time. It's been really great speaking with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
It's been fun, Andy.
Perfect. Okay. Guys, it's been another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Thanks, and here again from next week.